India and the world should see the global economy in these uncertain times is a very special guest, former RBI Governor and Professor at the University of Chicago Booth School, Raghuram Rajan. Good to have you once again on the show. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Professor Rajan, we spoke a couple of months ago, and since then, if anything, the world seems to be in an even more uncertain place. We've had the Trump tariffs still raging on, uncertainty over their future. We've had global conflicts, Russia, Ukraine intensifying, and even one here in the subcontinent between India and Pakistan. Given all that, how do you see the economic outlook in these uncertain times?
Well, for sure, some slowing is on the cards, right? We came into this year with an extraordinary performance last year, certainly in the United States, but that's sort of off the cards now with the tariffs creating an enormous amount of uncertainty, both in the United States but across the world. So if you're a business person today, where do you invest? Do you invest keeping in mind the current level of tariffs? Do you keep in mind the tariffs going back to high levels if the reciprocal tariffs go back on July 9th, 10th? Or do you sort of think of some magical negotiation which is going to bring them all down? It's hard for any business person to invest at this point, and that's part of why the uncertainty is going to slow growth. Investment is in deep trouble at this point.
But even in these uncertain times, India, last quarter figures, 7.4% growth rate, 24-25, 6.5%. Yes, slowing down compared to previous years, but you could argue much better than many other large economies in the world. How much do you see India being buffeted by these global headwinds at the moment? Is India's growth rate satisfying in these uncertain times?
Well, I think first, 6.5% is a very creditable growth rate. We should be careful about looking at the ups and downs of the last of the year so far. Some of it was postponed government investment as the election cycle played out. Some of it is that subsidies were registered up front. And so you had a few quarters of really low growth and then a few quarters of really high growth. So these are just statistical artifacts. The number to focus on is the 6.5. And of course, one of the bright lights in recent weeks is that the monsoon looks like it's going to be a strong one, which is going to enhance agricultural growth. One of the big concerns in India is that consumption has been driven by the upper middle class so far. And the lower middle class, the agriculturists, the rural areas, they're starting to show up in the consumption numbers, even while the upper middle class is flagging. So there may be a handoff in consumption. That's a positive because, of course, it also reduces inequality if the people who are worse off consume more. So broadly speaking, good, but we need more. I've been saying this, shouting from the rooftops forever so long. If we want to become a Viksit Desh by 2047, we need more like 8.5%, 9% growth because we are a relatively poor nation. And so that growth is what we should be aspiring for. This, I've said, could be India's moment, but we have to seize it.
You know, you're saying India's moment because the headlines here just a couple of days ago was the IMF projecting India's nominal GDP to cross that of Japan, become the third largest economy, fourth largest economy in the world, on its way to overtaking Japan. And yet, per capita income well below that of Japan and many other countries in the world. Do you believe that therefore, in your view, rather than look at that number, are we crossing Japan? When are we becoming the third largest economy next? The focus should be, what are we doing to reduce income inequality? What are we going to do to lift per capita income? And as you're saying now, 8.5% needs to be the target. Am I correct?
That's right. I mean, let's not minimize the fact that we are crossing these countries. We will cross Germany at some point over the next few years, maybe one or two. Exchange rate fluctuations also have an effect. The Japanese yen has strengthened. So we should take this as evidence that we're on a good path, but not necessarily get overly enthusiastic about it for the reasons you mentioned. We are much poorer than these countries, and what matters to the average citizen is how wealthy they are, not aggregate GDP, because we are the most populous country in the world. So aggregate GDP, overall GDP is going to be quite high, even if every citizen is quite poor. But that said, I think going forward, there is an opportunity for us with some of the rethinking of manufacturing supply chains. There's also some possibility that with some of these actions against students across the world, not just in the United States, but many countries are now getting a little more worried about having students come in from outside. There is an opportunity for us to expand our education sector. Can we keep the students who we would otherwise send abroad and give them a first-rate education? But can we also improve the quality of our universities so that they produce more research, which is absolutely necessary for India to become an innovative nation? So I would say this is a moment of introspection. We need to think about how we look over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Certainly the manufacturing-led growth path is coming under some kind of cloud with all this protectionism. That's something we have talked about in our recent book, Breaking the Mold. But we also need every job we can get, which means we need to work very hard on skilling our population. We need to work very hard on creating new jobs in services. We need to work hard on creating new sources of exports. And that's why I think, areas like the education sector, the healthcare sector could be also new areas of focus.
I'll come to the economic challenges once again in a moment, but you just mentioned about education. The entire Trump policy taking on Harvard University, trying to put a stop to all foreign student visas has troubled many in this country. You just seem to suggest that that is actually an opportunity perhaps for Indian education to raise its standards and keep students within. That's not going to be very easy. What's your overall take on what Trump is doing to the higher education system in the United States? And do you see really an opportunity here for India, or Indian students now finding it increasingly difficult to get into top-end American universities?
Well, yes, it is an unfortunate action by the administration to target not just the universities, but the students within those universities, the international students. You must remember that international students coming into the United States is a big export for the United States. 45 billion is what they earned, some of which we are paying from India. When our students go there and we pay tuition fees, we're essentially paying for U.S. education. That's been good. I don't want to fault that. U.S. universities have benefited, Indian students have benefited and been able to get jobs across the world, but also bring back a high quality of learning to India. So this has been win-win. And it's unfortunate that that in the United States, you're seeing actions against this very source of well-being between the U.S. and the rest of the world. It'll hurt the U.S. for sure. I think students are already asking, do I want to be there or do I want to go to Australia or the UK, which may be a little more welcoming? But also, it is, in the longer run, getting the best and the brightest into the United States has been a big source of growth. What I am saying is, let's try and find a silver lining in this cloud. It is a cloud. But the silver lining could be that if we focus on investing more in our education, including in our best universities, and bring them to a higher plane. China did this in the last 20 years. We can do it, and we absolutely need to do it if we want to have a place in in research and development. If we want new products that we can sell to the rest of the world. These are areas where India is relatively weak. Which Indian product is sold across the world? Which Indian car has a global market? These are areas we need to focus on, and I think we can.
But do you see a pushback to what Donald Trump has done with universities? Do you see American universities? You are, of course, a leading professor in one of them. Do you see a pushback in general in the next few months?
I think there is a pushback, of course. I think Harvard is fighting back quite vigorously. But I think this is damaging. No matter what happens, a fight between the universities and the government, essentially, students become collateral damage. Research becomes collateral damage. A lot of medical research has been halted while the government thinks about funding. This creates enormous uncertainty amongst researchers. And, I was in Singapore last week. The president of one of the universities there told me we used to have a hit rate of 40% when we made offers to US academics. Today, the hit rate is 100%. So you are seeing a weakening of US academia. Of course, it's very strong. And if these issues are resolved quickly, I don't see a longer term significant weakening. But people remember, and people, when offered choice between two places, will pick the place they feel more comfortable in.
Okay, let's turn then to another pushback, which is tariffs. The reason we started off with tariffs and the uncertainty over it, we've just heard the US Commerce Secretary saying that the India-US trade deal is on track. He hopes to have some good news in the next few weeks. What's your sense? Because there are two types of responses to what Trump is doing. Either countries are looking him in the eye or they are falling in line. And stronger nations seem to be willing to look him in the eye. Should India be looking Trump in the eye and seeing how can we get a win-win out of this trade deal? Do you believe this trade deal, as and when it happens, is good for India? Or is this uncertainty over it one of the major headwinds we will face?
Well, so long as we are careful about the areas which still need some support, certain parts of the agricultural sector will still need some support. So long as we're careful about that, broadly speaking, reducing our tariffs could be beneficial for us, even as we make a play for becoming host to many of the supply chains that crisscross the world. So in that, I don't see it as a win-lose if India accepts lower tariffs and does a deal with the United States. I don't see it as us kowtowing to them, but we have to do it with our interests in mind. Where are the areas that we can easily afford to bring down tariffs? Our industry, in many situations, actually becomes more competitive when they're forced to compete with imports and compete on a global stage. Remember, in the early 2000s, we were world beaters. Our industry felt it could take on the world. We need that kind of sort of enthusiasm again. That said, even as the tariffs get sort of settled, there is the huge issue of if the tariffs on China remain high from the United States, Chinese goods will look for a home elsewhere. And, one of the homes will be India. So we will have to figure out how we manage that without, on the one hand, reducing tariffs to the US, but elevating tariffs to the rest of the world. We need to be very clever about it, that where we benefit from Chinese imports, we should focus on keeping tariffs low. But of course, where there is dumping, we have to be careful about having an open door.
You just mentioned the China factor. There is also talk that you could have a US-China trade deal. There are those who are now using the word, Professor Rajan, taco. Trump always chickens out. Do you believe that he is bargaining hard with the Chinese? And is that also something we should be looking at very carefully from our perspective? As you said, the fear that if tariffs remain high with China, there could be dumping of goods in this country. Is China the X factor when I look at global headwinds over the next few months?
Well, I would say anybody who says they can predict what this administration will do is being overly optimistic. I think we have seen backward, forward, left, right, all kinds of moves by the administration suggesting that there isn't a clear overall plan. It depends to some extent. There are factions in the administration. It depends which faction has the ear of the president at a particular point in time. For example, if you remember in the election campaign, it was all about China being the rival, geopolitical rival, and therefore tariffs had to be really high on it. But of course, we've seen that in recent weeks, there's more of a dialogue initiated with China, even while Europe seems to be a little more of the enemy. So I think it's hard to predict what will happen. But almost surely, I think we'll see the contours. We have to see the contours of some kind of agreement. It won't be full because trade agreements take a long time, but some kind of framework soon. Otherwise, the uncertainty will kill.
Professor Rajan, there's one other potential headwind looking at the future. The recently released minutes of the US Federal Reserve meeting held in early May warned of high inflation in the United States because of Trump's policies. Now, if high inflation happens and the US goes into recession, how worrying is that for India? How should India be looking at that possibility?
Well, if it's a serious downturn and that will be accompanied by job losses, I think the Fed will have at that point enough information to cut, and it will start cutting. What the Fed will not do is preemptive cuts, anticipating that slowdown, because the economy has been quite resilient so far. The hard data are still, maybe it changes with this Friday's labor market numbers, but the hard data in the US are still with a reasonably strong economy. So I think every estimate of growth over the coming year is down. Last year was 2.8%. This year, 1% seems like where a number of investment banks have coordinated. And 1% means you're not that far from a recession. So I think the Fed will certainly wait and see. If the recession is bad, it can cut interest rates. It has a fair amount of ammunition. But there's no offsetting the kinds of headwinds that we talked about earlier, which is issues like the uncertainty about tariffs, the uncertainty about government policy and investments. So, the Fed can do a little bit, but it could be that, the downturn is hard to sort of offset, at least for a while.
But what's your sense? Is America, is the fear of recession real?
It is because your sort of baseline estimate of growth is much lower than it was at the beginning of the year as a result of what has happened so far. So you're flirting more with recession. Is it a certainty? No, absolutely not. If everything is reversed, the tariffs are reversed, could growth pick up quite strongly? Yes. But if we continue with the uncertainty, we have days of 50% tariffs, days of 100% tariffs, and then back and forth, I think the likelihood of a recession increases considerably. At this point, it's still, in my view, below 50%, but it is something that depends intimately on how policy evolves.
At the same time, Professor Rajan, global supply chains being reevaluated, restructured, in this post-pandemic world, given also the uncertainty over US-China's trade war, could India emerge as a key beneficiary? There's a sense that this could be, as you said earlier, our moment. Is one of that moment to sort of replace, if not replace, at least be seen as an alternate to global supply chains. Do you believe that that's an opportunity? Or with Donald Trump speaking about make America great again, even telling Apple that you don't produce in India for America. How do you see it? Is this an opportunity, or is Donald Trump going to play spoilsport?
It is definitely an opportunity, but we have to be very diplomatic about it. I wouldn't trump from the rooftops that doesn't such player is bringing that supply chain in. I would keep relatively quiet about it, but do my best to attract every kind of manufacturer I can to come to the country, as well as service providers. There's no reason why it only needs to be manufacturing. That means doing our homework. What we've always insisted we're doing, but we need to do more of. make the playing field a little more welcoming. Stop having tax demands on business people which come out of the blue, which vitiate all their operations for many years. I mean, have some control. I mean, this is something that even within the government, you hear sort of worries about this kind of tax demand coming, but the government needs to control its tax authorities. Similarly, I think the level playing field on rules and regulations. You can't suddenly invent a regulation to benefit Indian national champions, even while hurting foreign investors who've come in. Nobody wants privileges, but they want some certainty about policies. And if we can give them that at this point and rein in some of the undue demands we have, I think we could certainly, attract more. Of course, we also need to do homework for our domestic firms. Easier rules and regulations, more transparent, as well as focus on things like land acquisition and so on, which have been often a bugbear. But that said, we've made enormous improvements in infrastructure, which I think will be helpful for whatever sets up in India.
So what you're saying, net is ease of doing business based on ensuring stable policies and critical reforms. Am I correct? The worry is, of course, that the ease of doing business is spoken about, but on the ground, businessmen still find India a tough place to do business in.
Absolutely. So I would have. So we had a committee which was set up in the last budget. I would accelerate the working of that committee. The CEA has said basically that we should look inwardly to see what we need to remedy. I agree entirely with that view. And we should hear people on the ground. There's no point sort of ticking off dozen such doing business measures that the World Bank puts out. We need to ask business people on the ground, have things improved? And utilize information technology to the maximum extent possible, both to facilitate the compliance with rules, but also to pick out rogue bureaucrats who are, holding up business. We need to do that effectively if we are going to make a difference.
We spoke a little earlier about the trade deal. Now, one of the concerns is potential U.S. demands for access to India's agriculture and dairy sectors. And opinion seems divided. A recent Niti Aayog working paper has argued India should offer concessions on agriculture products from U.S. such as edible oils and nuts, where domestic supply gaps exist. Do you believe that, because that has often been the big hurdle to ensuring trade deals with different parts of the world. We've just done one with the United Kingdom. Do you believe it's time to open up agriculture as well? Should there be a full-blown trade deal with the United States, or do we go step by step?
We should introspect and open up judiciously. I don't think agriculture should be completely off bounds. There are places where our farmers, agriculturalists, our horticulturalists are competitive with the rest of the world, or with a little bit of extra investment could be competitive. I think that should be seen as an opportunity, and to the extent that we can, do deals where they open up also, even as we open up, it may benefit both countries. But that requires looking at each and every sector with a close eye and not going in with, even the word that you use, concession. It may not necessarily be a concession. It could be win-win. Mm-hmm. If we get access to some of their markets for our agriculturists. We need to take them into confidence. We need to persuade, but it doesn't need to be that every time we reduce an agricultural tariff, that's a loss for India.
We started this chat, Professor Rajan, by saying that India, at the moment, among large economies, doing relatively better. But as you said, for the future, that's just not good enough. We need to grow at 8.5%. Do you believe the key, therefore, lies in stimulating private consumption and indeed some element of manufacturing, which really hasn't kept up with other sectors of the economy? And where would you start? So if today you were told, Dr. Rajan, how do we move from 6.5 to 8.5, given the uncertain global climate in the next couple of years, what would you say? Or should we just wait and see what happens over the next 12 months, given the uncertainties across the world?
No, my worry is we're both complacent at the business level and complacent at the governance level. That somehow we've eased into this, oh, we're growing so well, we've just overtaken Japan, etc., we're doing fine. We're not. This is the time of our maximum population dividend. And if we're not creating jobs, we're not employing people, we're not growing at 2% decades, we're underperforming. And so we need to shed this complacency, which means that, look, be pragmatic. Don't go with ideological blinkers, manufacturing is the only way or services is the only way. Do everything that works and energize the states. A lot of states now want to do more. Draw them in along with the center and learn from the best practices that states have. For example, Tamil Nadu has this semi-private organization called Guidance, which helps businesses from outside set up in India. They also help businesses within India set up in Tamil Nadu. Why can't we sort of roll that out more widely, learn from what seems to be working amongst our states, and join with the center? It can't be that the center says you invest only in this state or that state. It has to be you invest in India. India's open. And whatever the state comes up, I'm going to support it. We need to think across every dimension at this point. There is a sense of urgency which I feel sometimes is lacking. We need to develop that because if this time is to be our time, we need to work on every front.
A final question. You've been traveling across the world. I saw you in Singapore a few days ago. How is the world looking at India? We've just gone through, as I said, this conflict with Pakistan, the uncertainty, the element of destabilization that followed that. Is the world looking at India with renewed eyes as a potential marketplace, as a global supply chain, an alternate to China? Or do we need to do, as you've been saying, much more to get the world to take real notice of India and the India story?
Well, I think that one worry, I don't want to talk about the broader issues, that is not my area of expertise, but one worry of about the conflict with Pakistan is it raised questions about geopolitical stability in this area of the world, and also, in a sense, put us back in a bucket with Pakistan. We need to avoid that because we need to see ourselves as a much bigger global player. And that, we have a much more stable political regime. And therefore, our focus is beyond sort of the nitty, jitpit with neighbors. Again, I don't want to say it's that. I just want to say that we need to rise above the sense that we are held on equal terms with our small neighbors. To some extent, our bigger concern is that we become competitive with China. Rather than put Pakistan as the as being clubbed with Pakistan, better to be India, China. And then we have a elevated position in people's minds.
But net the world looking at India with optimism, even in these troubled, difficult, uncertain times?
I think people are looking for places to invest. And I think that there are many things which are going right for India, including a large domestic market. I do think that, there are areas we need to work on. For example, if we want to improve the quality of our universities, we also need to focus on freedom of speech within the universities. That's something that is putting people off in the US. We should, ensure that it puts people off India. So I think there's work to do. But I do think that we have a chance, and it is for us to lose it. Let's put all the effort we can.
Okay. Professor Rajan, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. You've given us a really broad overview of the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for India and indeed economies across the world. As always, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for giving us the time.
Most welcome.